Okay, it's 6:30, so we're going to get started here tonight. Thanks for coming to the Find Your Fit College 101 session. My name is Mary Pat O'Neill, and I am a volunteer with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. I'm an independent college counselor, and I began volunteering with the foundation back, I think it was 2016, and I'm really proud of all the programs that we have put together to help families with the journey after high school. Okay, so any of you who have attended my sessions before, and I always have problems with my getting my slides to work. Hang on a second. As always, try this again. Share my screen. Go to slideshow. Okay. All right. And just a reminder that I am a resource in the community. I always want families to understand that I am never trying to push any services on you. I'm simply here as a resource for the college process. So any questions that you have, don't hesitate to email at findyourfit@lwsf.org. And the way tonight's going to go, it is a longer session. I've scheduled this for 2 hours, but I'm hoping it takes about an hour and a half for the actual session. Then we'll do questions. This is being recorded. Everybody who signed up to attend tonight will receive a recording. And with the email that you receive with the recording, there will be handouts. I do not share my PowerPoint presentation, but I will make sure that you get all the pertinent information from tonight, and you're welcome to take pictures of any slides that you want. The slides are mostly here to keep me on track so that I know what to talk about. But what we're going to be, this is the format for tonight. First of all, it'll be, what do colleges want to know about students? So what's going to go into a college application? I'm going to talk about the different types of colleges that there are here in the United States. I'm also going to describe how to create a college list. I'll talk a little bit about highly selective colleges, and then also talk about the cost of college. There are some polls that we have set up. If you feel like answering them, it helps us to give us information on who's attending tonight. So a couple different things that I always want everybody to understand. I wish in some ways that the college process was a one-size-fits-all process. It's not. And colleges do things in many different ways. So oftentimes I do have to answer with the response, it depends on the college, when I get asked a question. And I also want to remind everyone here that everyone is different. And so what's right for one person is not right for another person. And that's just the way human beings work. So, and while I am here to talk about the more traditional four-year college path after high school, I always want to remind everybody that there is more than one path. As I said earlier, this is not a one-size-fits-all process. A few months ago, Find Your Fit did a session on technical colleges and apprenticeships, and there's lots of different things for students, and there's just different opportunities, again, depending on what's right for the person. And another thing I just like to set the stage for is, I think the college process is best served when the student controls the process. This doesn't mean that students shouldn't be listening to their parents. They absolutely should. But as far as who's doing all the work and making the decisions and deciding, where to visit and things like that, it is best served if the student is in charge of it. And just a reminder, I liken the college process to the old joke of how do you eat an elephant, which is one bite at a time. Tonight, I will be introducing you to the elephant, which can seem overwhelming because, as I said earlier, I think I have about an hour and a half worth of information to share with you. However, it is not rocket science. If it was, I couldn't help anybody because I am not a rocket scientist. And most parents are their children's college counselor. And that was true in our family too. For my son, I was a college counselor already, but for our daughter, I wasn't. And I think that is very normal. So don't think that you have to have a college counselor. I'm just trying to share the information maybe to make your job a little bit easier. And one of the best parts about this whole process, at least in my opinion, is how transformative the process is. Again, there's a poll there. I'm kind of curious as to what grade students are in and things like that. But there is a big difference between a 9th grader or a 10th grader versus a senior. And as a parent, it is so wonderful to watch it. In my job, I get to see that with students and see them change. It is not a transactional process. And what I mean by that is, in many other countries in the world, applying to college is more transactional. A student's cumulative GPA factored by some standardized test score, that sum total, that 0.000 difference, is what determines what college a student gets to go to. In the United States, it doesn't work that way. So I said, I love the transformative nature of it. And maybe parents, if you're thinking, maybe your child's driving you a little crazy, just give it time. You will be surprised at how much they change and grow by the time they graduate from high school. So let's start talking about what colleges may possibly ask for in a college application. And I highlighted the word possible here because, as I said, this is not a one-size-fits-all process. There's a lot of colleges in the United States. Some colleges only want one piece of this, some want 5, some want any number in between. For the most part, they're not weighed equally, even if a college wants all 5 pieces. And I'll try to give some general information about that. Keeping in mind, though, it does depend on the college. They don't weigh everything equally, but these are the 5 possible parts, and then I'm going to go into them one by one. So the high school transcript, this is the one piece of the college application that is never optional. You're not going to be able to apply to college without a high school transcript. And again, when I talked about the weight process, transcripts are probably one of the things that are weighed the heaviest. Essays can be weighed pretty fairly too, but okay, so let's first talk about the high school transcript. So in Washington State, we do not weight GPA. And what a weighted GPA is, if you were taking an honors class and you got an A, instead of it being a 4, which is what an unweighted GPA, the highest you can go is 4, a student would receive a 4.5. If a student was taking an AP class or an IB class and they got an A, instead of a 4, it would be a 5. And that's basically what weighted GPAs mean. But we don't weight in Washington State. So don't worry about weighted GPAs. But sometimes when you look at data on colleges, you can tell that there's a weighted GPA because the average student GPA is either very close to a 4.0 or it's over a 4.0. And when a student fills out a college application, and in most cases, it's going to be the cumulative GPA through the end of junior year, which is why everybody talks about the importance of junior year. It's the last full year of grades that a college will see. There's a box and a student fills out what their cumulative GPA is, again, starting in 9th grade. And then there's a box that the student checks, is this a weighted GPA or an unweighted GPA? Again, in Washington State, we have unweighted GPA. So you check it so the college knows this is an unweighted GPA. And if for some reason the college wanted a weighted GPA, they have the means to do it. They just take a student's transcript and they recalculate it very quickly. But okay, so then talking about GPA, so since we only use unweighted GPAs, our highest GPA is a 4.0. And there's different, we call them buckets, let's say, for these GPAs. The top bucket is the 4.0 to 3.75 bucket. The next one is 3.74 to 3.5, then 3.49 to 3.25, and it just keeps dropping down. And this is where data can be very useful when we talk about creating a college list and trying to figure out if it's balanced and all this stuff. But using the University of Washington as an example, last year, when I look at admitted student GPA, 68% of admitted students to the University of Washington Seattle campus had a 3.75 or higher. When it drops to 3.74 to 3.5, it's 23%. So that tells me that 91% of admitted students to the University of Washington last year had a 3.5 or higher. So if I was talking to a junior, second semester junior, who had a 3.3 GPA, I would have to break it to them that, again, I don't have a crystal ball. However, it's highly unlikely that they would be admitted to UW Seattle. So one of the things I often talk to younger students about and parents is using a GPA calculator, which I can do a little search and type in high school GPA calculator. And sometimes it can be very interesting to motivate a student like, oh, this is the school you want to go to. And let's look at the data. You know what, if you can get an A in this class or a C in this class, see what happens with your GPA. We did that with our son, and it was very motivating to him. So, okay, so that's the part about GPA. The other thing that colleges take a look at with a high school transcript is there's what's called a secondary school report on every high school. And it's basically a report card on a high school. So I'm going to use Eastlake as an example because that's where my kids went and I know it pretty well. It would say that, this many thousands of students attend Eastlake High School. This is the demographic breakdown of students. This is the percentage of students who receive free and reduced lunch. After graduation, this is the number of students who go on to a 4-year college, a 2-year college, or the military. They would show the average ACT and SAT scores of the students at Eastlake, and then they would list the classes of rigor, right? And this is going to depend on the high school. But at Eastlake, the rigor classes are honors classes, followed by UW in the classroom, followed by AP classes. And the reason why colleges want to know this information is because high schools are not created equally. Like Washington is a very strong public school district. Eastlake's a very strong public high school, but there are students in the state of Washington who attend high schools that don't have regular calculus, let alone AP calculus, and they don't want to penalize students for not taking advantage of these harder classes if they're not available. On the flip side, let's say a student had a 4.0, but they never took advantage of any of those rigor classes at Eastlake. There are a number of colleges, and UW is certainly one of them, where they go, we don't think so highly of your 4.0 because you never took advantage of the harder work. And I always want to make sure everybody understands balance here. Sometimes people hear what I just said and think, oh my gosh, my kid needs to take 5 AP classes a year or 6 AP classes a year. That is not what I'm saying, because as I said, there's more than one thing that colleges look at. It's very unhealthy for most students. It's not good for their mental health. You have to have balance in your life. And so what I encourage students to do is to push themselves in the classes that interest them. Again, my poor son, I use him all the time, but he was a student who did not like history, did not care for English. He was more of a STEM student. He was not going to be taking AP Lang or APUSH or anything like that, just because he just wasn't interested. But give him AP Calculus and BC and AP Physics and things like that, AP Chem, he loved those classes. So again, everybody's different. And if you're not going to do well in the class, you shouldn't take it, because again, that GPA is really important. But if you can, a lot of colleges do like to see the rigor. I often get questions about Running Start. I'm not going to read this to you, but so what Running Start is, it's a way for a student to fulfill their high school graduation requirements, but you do it through, in our district, a lot of times it's Bellevue College or Lake Washington Institute of Technology. And at the same time, a student is also earning college credits. And I'm often asked, is that considered rigorous? Well, yes, of course it's rigorous. Now, is it as rigorous as an AP class? No, it isn't. But this is from UW's website, and UW has one of the very clear websites. I love their website, but they love Running Start. Most of the schools in our area in the West Coast, they respect and accept Running Start. Now, would a Stanford want Running Start? Probably not, because they're a lot more selective. But just know it's a great way for students to earn college credit for free. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's not for everybody. Again, some kids love Running Start, some kids don't want to do Running Start, but just know it's a great program, and it's well respected by the colleges in our area. So the second thing that colleges can ask for is test scores, standardized test scores, specifically the ACT and SAT. This is the area that has been hit hardest with the pandemic, social changes, and things like that. So in the past, some colleges might have weighed test scores on par with a student's GPA and rigor and things like that. A lot of colleges, including the University of Washington, Washington State, Western Washington, Central and Eastern, the University of California system, Cal State, they don't look at test scores. Okay, they're not looking at them for admission at all. So again, depending on a student's list, they may or may not need test scores. So many colleges have gone test optional since the class of 21 when the pandemic hit. Many colleges are continuing with that. I always tell families, I don't have a crystal ball and I can't look into the future. However, for the class of 23, which is our juniors right now, already 1,400 colleges have said we will continue our policy. Now, that being said, there are some colleges in specific states like Florida, Georgia, North Carolina. The public universities there require them. So again, it's going to depend on your college list. I think for most students, it's probably not a bad idea to have a test score in case it's needed for an application. But just know that with the ACT and the SAT, they accept both. There is absolutely no preference between the two. And what these tests are meant to measure is what a typical junior in high school knows. So I'll go through my little list in a minute, but it's meant to measure what a junior knows. So freshmen and sophomores, you should not be doing anything for standardized testing. In our district, sophomores do take the PSAT in the fall of sophomore year. The PSAT stands for preliminary SAT. It is simply a way for students to get introduced to standardized testing. Sophomore scores go absolutely nowhere. Most of my sophomores say, oh, I didn't do very well. And I always say, of course, you're a sophomore, and that test is meant to measure what a junior knows. It also assumes a student has completed Algebra 2. In junior year, it is used for national merit, which only about 1% of students will qualify for. But again, it's a great practice standardized test. One of the things I often recommend, because again, the tests are similar, but they're different, and I'll go through that in just a minute. But one of the things that students can do, and I think this is a great idea because colleges accept both, they do not have a preference, is around the same time that a student is taking the PSAT, is they could take a mock ACT, which most of the PTSAs offer in the fall and the spring of each year. Any test prep company will also offer them. And then when you get your scores, you can compare them. There's what's called a concordance chart. And if you get the score on the PSAT and the score here, you can see which one you do better on. And that's the one that I would advise a student to pursue if they're going to take a test. Again, it's not a bad idea to have test scores. Prior to COVID, a lot of times standardized testing was used for WUI money, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. It was also could be used for merit scholarships. That's changed a lot, but I've had students where they've been admitted to a college without test scores and they receive scholarship money, but then the college says, but if you have test scores, we might give you more. So again, I do think for juniors, it's not a bad idea. Again, it depends on the student. Just know that the writing section, the optional writing section, you do not need to do that. The SAT got rid of it. The ACT still has it. But unless you're planning to apply to a military academy, you don't need to take that optional writing section. So these are how the tests are similar but different. The SAT is considered more balanced. It's for slower readers because they give more time. It's half math. So students who love math might prefer the SAT. If kids with test anxiety may like the SAT better because they do give more time to answer questions, it is actually a harder test because it's more conceptual, and the top score is 1,600. The ACT, I don't like the words, I should change this. It's not really weaker in math, it just has less math, and the math is more direct. It's for strong readers, faster readers. The student who takes tests easily and is like first one done, they typically like the ACT. They do well under pressure, and the top score is 36. And it's a little bit more of a straightforward test. And there's lots of different ways to prepare. I'm very old, and back in my day, when I took these tests, I didn't study because they're meant to measure what a typical junior knows. So I just took them. And that is certainly an option. It's not what most students do. Familiarity with the material is key, and that's where practice tests can be helpful. I talk to a lot of test prep people, and they recommend 8 weeks on the short end, 12 weeks on the long end to prepare for these. And when I say prepare, I'm not talking about 10, 15 hours a week. It's basically about 2 hours a week, taking some practice tests and things like that. So a student can self-study. Khan Academy has some great free online materials. You can take classes, you can do one-on-one tutoring. If a student receives accommodations in the high school, maybe extra time or taking their test in a quiet room or things like that, you are these students should be also receiving accommodations for testing, including AP testing, SAT, PSAT, ACT, all that stuff. You have to do it through your high school counseling office. So anyways, just different options there. And I always show this. This is just a score distribution. So, everybody wants to be in the 99th percentile with these tests, but the reality is we can't. If they could, they'd have to redo the test. And so, the average ACT score is a 20, the average SAT score is 1,000. And that's just the way that it goes. So again, in the past, you'd see students taking these things multiple times, trying to improve their score so much. But again, so many schools are test optional nowadays and seem to continue. We did do a webinar, I guess it was maybe 2 weeks ago, on the subject of standardized testing. It's available on the Lake Washington School Foundation website. And if you have questions, we went a lot more in depth on that. So here's my advice for the ACT or SAT. If you're a junior, class of 23, if you have good scores, and I know that's relative, send them in. And what a good score is, and there's all sorts of information available online, and I'll be showing you some different resources for this. But every college has a 50th percentile range of test scores. And it depends on the college. One colleges might be over here, one colleges might be here, and other colleges might be here. It just depends on the college. And if a student's test scores are in that 50th percentile range, that's considered good. If it's below, again, if it's right on the border, maybe, but if it's way below, you probably don't want to send it because it's not going to help your cause. If it's above the 50th percentile, then absolutely you should be sending it. So anyways, class of 24, look at your PSAT scores, but I would still hold off to do anything for the class of 24, the sophomores, until at least this summer. You do technically become a junior the day sophomore year is over. And then the class of, typo in there, class of 25, the freshmen, don't even think about it right now. There's other things that you can be spending your time on. And I show this raffle ticket, and you're going to see it another time. I use it multiple times in this presentation. But this is that, remember, it's not a transaction. And oftentimes, students and maybe parents, they get all excited that they have 4.0s, and maybe they've taken, a lot of difficult classes, and they are blessed with the ability to do well on standardized testing. And they think like, ooh, that's going to get me into name any highly selective school that you want. And we'll be talking more about highly selective schools, but just keep in mind, it gets you, like I call it, the raffle ticket, because everybody who's applying to these schools has exactly the same data points that you do. And unfortunately, it's not enough to get you into the college. 20 years ago, yes, it probably could have been, but not anymore. And that leads us to the third possible thing that a college can ask for again. And activities are important. I think they play a more important role in the essay part, but they're still important in the college application. So what a high school activity list, it's like a resume. And starting in 9th grade, and 9th grade starts the day 8th grade is over, so the summer before 9th grade counts. A college just wants to know, when you're not doing homework and you're not in school, how do you spend your time? And there's all sorts of different categories that these activities can fall under. They can be organized high school activities, but I work with a lot of kids who they don't like that kind of stuff. That's okay. You can do things within the community. You can do sports. And to answer your question, I get this question all the time. My child doesn't do sports. Can they go to college? Absolutely. Sports, it's neither here nor there. The only time I guess you have to do a sport is if you're a recruited athlete. I guess that would be important. It can be through a religious organization. Colleges do differentiate between extracurricular and volunteer activities. And again, volunteering doesn't have to be 40 hours a week or anything like that, but maybe as a family, if there's a cause that you care about, maybe a couple hours a month and stuff like that you do things. The student can have jobs. They can talk about hobbies or special interests. They can also showcase any awards that they have won. Sometimes students don't realize that the things that they do in their free time are activities. Like I've had students who build Tesla coils in their garage because they just love that kind of stuff, or they teach themselves how to code, or they, build a website for, things like that. Those are activities. They just want to know, when you're not in school and you're not doing homework, how do you spend your time? And I know a lot of our students, they are busy in school, they're taking hard classes, they've got a lot of homework, again, that whole balance. And so I always just remind families that summertime can be a great time to explore activities too. It doesn't always have to be during the school year. My daughter, when she was in high school, she did competitive dance, and she wasn't going to be a competitive dancer, but it was something that she enjoyed. And then on top of it, she was taking pretty rigorous high school classes. So, if she wasn't dancing, she was upstairs doing homework. So she didn't have a lot of time to explore the STEM side of her, which is where her career and college interests actually were, but she would do that over the summertime, and that's perfectly fine too. And again, on this activity list, the colleges want to know, in addition to the grade, the year that you do them, 9, 10, 11, 12, they also want to know the hours per week and the weeks per year that a student does. And if you hopefully take a piece of advice here, I tell all my students, this is a working document, and I recommend that you start it now. If you're a 9th grader, a 10th grader, 11th grader, and you haven't done anything about it, just start it now. You can use a Google Doc, a Word doc, you can use index cards. It doesn't make any difference, but you want to just keep working on it. And you want to put a note in your phone or on your calendar at the end of first semester, spend a couple minutes updating it. At the end of second semester, spend a couple minutes updating it. At the end of the summer, spend a couple minutes updating it. And then when you're a senior filling this thing out, you're not scratching your head going, Mom, Dad, I can't remember. What did I do in 9th grade? Because everyone has a hard time remembering that. So do that. And I just have this little slide here just to remind everybody, sometimes students are afraid to stop doing things. They're afraid that they're going to look like they're a quitter. Every year of high school typically gets more difficult, taking harder classes and things like that. And there's only so much time, and you have to have balance. And, maybe you did a lot of sports when you were younger, but then as you're advancing, you find this passion for something, whatever it is, and you want to start doing more of that, but there's only so much time. It's okay. You can quit things. There's not a contract here. Okay, the fourth possible thing, and I would say, again, we talked about the weighting of stuff. Letters of rec are typically considered in a college application. They're not very important or necessarily important. Again, it depends on the college, but generally speaking, these are not the most important part of a college application. And again, a lot of colleges won't even accept letters of rec, like University of Washington, Washington State, Western, the UCs, Cal State. They won't even look at them. So don't worry about sending those. But a lot of other colleges do require teacher recommendations. There's a counselor recommendation. And we go to public schools. Our counselors have a lot of students. I never worry about these being super warm and fuzzy. I mean, they might be if you happen to know your counselor, but a lot of students don't know their counselor. They change their counselor every year. So don't worry about those. But teacher recommendations are different. They do need to be a teacher who taught the student in high school. Typically they should be core classes. I'm not saying all the time. There could be special circumstances why a language teacher would be appropriate, or a business, teacher, but they're typically core classes. Colleges tend to prefer junior year or senior year teachers because the student is more mature, it's more recent, and the work is typically harder. I usually have my students ask for teacher recommendations in the spring of junior year. The teachers do not write them then, but it's a good idea to get them lined up because teachers do not have to write letters of recommendation. It is above and beyond their job description, and they're a lot of work. So if students who wait until October of senior year for a November deadline, they're often disappointed because the teacher says, sorry, I'm full, or I only was writing 5 and I filled that back in May, type thing. So again, advice for students: if you don't engage with your teachers, again, you don't have to engage with all of them, but if you like a class, you like your teacher, try to smile, say hi, make a little chit chat with them, maybe bring them a cookie one day or something, because it's a lot easier to ask for letters of recommendation when you've actually engaged with a teacher. Many colleges that do require teacher recommendations, and my rule of thumb is 2. Again, there are some colleges that will accept more, but 2 is a good number to have in your back pocket if you need them. The colleges that require teacher recommendations often will allow what's called an outside recommender, which is basically a non-teacher. This could be, maybe you know the principal well, maybe it's a sport coach, maybe you have an internship or you babysit for somebody and the family writes one, or maybe it's your grandmother or your best friend. I mean, it totally depends on the college as to what they will accept, but just keep that in mind that you may have chances for non-teachers to write you a letter of recommendation. And then the final piece of the puzzle is the college essay or essays. Again, it's going to depend on a student's college list. And if from a weighting standpoint, oftentimes essays are weighed pretty heavily. Like if you look at what UW weighs, they weigh GPA, rigor, and essays. All is very important. So again, there are schools that don't require them. And I certainly have students who say, Mary Pat, would you please find me that class list because I don't want to have to write an essay. That's perfectly fine. But for colleges that do require essays, this is where a student's activities become so useful. On the activity list, again, it depends on the application and all that kind of stuff, but generally speaking, activities, a student is allowed about 150 characters to describe an activity. So that's not very much. Whereas with a college essay, it might be 650 words, 300 words. Again, it depends on the college. But obviously a student has a lot more space to be able to describe what they did. And I call this anecdotal proof that a student's activities can give. So if a student says, oh, you want to understand a challenge that I've overcome? Well, let me prove it. Let me tell you this story. Or, oh, you want to see my leadership skills? Well, let me tell you this story. And this is where activities become so useful. And it is a very different style of writing than what most students are used to in high school. These are not English papers by any sense of the imagination. It's a conversational storytelling type of a thing where a student's voice should hopefully be coming through. And the student's goal is to tell a story that they're the only person in the world who can tell it, which I realize does sound intimidating, but it's easier than it sounds. And colleges are looking for a student's personality and character. And if you think about the rest of the application, like a transcript and a test score, there's no character or personality there. It's data. And so that's why the essay can be so important. The student needs to be the center of the essay. And if I'm freaking you out about essays, just know, find your fit. I'll be doing college boot camps, and then I do a number of just essay sessions alone. That will be happening in the summer and fall. So we'll be taking care of that later. Sometimes students have special circumstances that they need to tell. Maybe there were health issues. So most college applications have a spot. There's 2 spots now because of COVID, but one just says, hey, is there any additional information that we should know about you? And students can use that for circumstances. Or there's also the COVID specific, which that box has gotten a lot of use with a lot of students, but there's a lot of students who, I've been seeing it this year, really struggled with remote learning last year, especially in math. And so when they came back to in-person, some students have really seen their math grades go down. And these are kids who've never had this happen before. And hopefully they're getting it back up again. But if you want to explain something that happened, just know that there are spots, or if there's health issues, or I've had students discover that they have a learning difference that they didn't know about, and it impacted different things. But just know that if a student has special circumstances to explain, there's a spot on the college application to do that. There's other things that can be considered as part of the admission part. This is not part of the college application, but it's just things to think about. Some colleges pay attention to what's called demonstrated interest. And this is where a student demonstrates that they're actually interested in attending a college. Things that can demonstrate interest: obviously visiting a college, doing an official tour where you've signed up to the college, attending a college fair and stopping and talking to admissions officers. Seattle has a lot of college fairs. If they come to your high school, attending that, making a point of talking to the admission person, saying, hey, and following up with an email. If you get emails from colleges, which a lot of you might be, they know if you've opened them, if you've read them, following them on social media, things like that. FYI, highly selective schools do not care about demonstrated interest, but a lot of other colleges do. Again, the UCs don't, UW doesn't, but a number of colleges do. And it's because it ties into this next thing, yield management. And you'll hear me say this in a few minutes, but colleges are businesses and no one should ever think anything else. But so what happens is colleges, they don't know where else students have applied to college. So many colleges, well, all colleges, they accept more students than they have spots for, because they know that colleges, or that students have applied to more than one college. So I don't know UW's numbers off the top of my head, but it's something like, I don't know, like last year, don't hold me to this, but it's something like 50,000 students applied to UW last year, and let's say 24,000 of them were accepted. And then ultimately there's like 7,000 freshman spots. So out of all the kids that they offer admission to, not everybody takes it. A school like Stanford or Harvard, they have a much smaller range because students are more likely to accept the offers. So, but when a college is looking at the numbers, and you'll hear this like, oh my gosh, I was more than qualified for a school, but I didn't get in. If the school cares about yield management and they don't see any demonstrated interest, they might be like, oh, this kid, I don't maybe the school's in the East Coast, and we live here in Seattle, and they're like, okay, our research has shown the odds of a kid from Seattle coming out to Vermont, especially when the student hasn't demonstrated any interest, they haven't contacted admissions, they haven't visited us, they haven't done anything, it's possible that a student won't be offered admission even though they're very qualified, because the colleges are paying attention to that. So that'll be one of the resources that I send afterwards, is what is demonstrated interest and how do you do it. So this is the timeline, just roughly. So the transcript is typically 9th through 11th grade. Sometimes colleges will ask for senior year, first semester, senior year grades, and a student's final transcript is sent to the college that a student chooses to attend. With the ACT and SAT scores, they're typically taken in 11th or 12th grade. You have till late fall of senior year typically to take them. Some colleges have students self-report their scores. Others ask for official scores to be submitted. Again, you got to pay attention to that because it depends on the college. Even if you self-report, and if you self-report your scores and decide and you're accepted at a school and you choose to attend there, your official scores will need to be sent, because obviously it's just a student reporting their scores, not having it substantiated. The activity list starts in 9th grade. Letters of rec are typically core classes. As I said, I usually say to ask for them in spring of junior year. These are uploaded directly to the college from the recommender. Students do not see their letters of recommendation. And then essays should be worked on in the summer prior to senior year and also senior year. And there's different platforms for colleges. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but you might have heard of the Common App or the Coalition App. There's different state applications. Texas has its application. The University of California has a system, Cal State. Some colleges have their own application, like Washington State has its own application, whereas UW uses the coalition application. All it is, it's just simply a platform. It's not a big deal. And most college applications are due in November of senior year. And I always tell students and families, again, I'll go more in detail on this when I do a senior boot camp, but pay attention to the application deadlines and document deadlines, because they can be very different. Sometimes they're the same. A document might be a letter of rec or test scores. And again, you want to make sure you submit things on time. Some schools, especially a smaller school, might say, oh, okay, you missed the deadline by a day. Well, no big deal. And then there's other colleges, especially the big state schools. You miss the deadline, you have missed the deadline. And I've had kids do that because they're not paying attention. There's different deadlines in colleges. So there's what's called early decision. And just know that, again, it's going to depend on the college as to what deadline that they offer. But early decision, if it's offered, a student may only apply to one school early decision. And this is very strategic. If I was looking at my client base, I'd generally say maybe 15 or 20% of my students. It's gotten a little higher the last couple of years because of test optional. But if a student applies early decision, it's a contract. The parents have to sign off on it. The school counselor has to sign off on it. The student has to sign off on it. And if a student is admitted, they have to go. So we're going to talk about the cost of college in a little bit. So you want to make sure that you're good with the cost, because it is a contract. You can't just go, oh, I changed my mind. You also have to rescind all of your other outstanding college applications. So if you applied to UW, you have to write them and say, please remove my application because I've chosen to go to a school early decision. So it's a really serious thing. The reason why a lot of students like to do it and colleges like it, a lot of the more selective schools will fill maybe half or more of their freshman class through early decision, because colleges know that's that yield management I talked about, because they know they got them and they're set with those numbers. There's another deadline called early action. This is a great way for, especially for strong students, students who aren't trying to improve their grades, or, they've been working on their applications. They're not going to rush around and try to do this, but, you've made a thoughtful application. You still have till May 1st, which is college decision day in normal circumstances, but a student just hears back sooner. It's usually early action deadlines are November 1st or November 15th. A lot of other schools only have regular decision, like the University of Washington in Seattle has one decision date or application date. It is November 15th. Now, UW Bothell, they have an early action date in November, and then their regular is, I think, January 1st. I can't remember. University of California schools, again, they have one deadline. And then there's what's called rolling admissions, like Washington State uses rolling, University of Arizona, Arizona State. And it just simply means that once a student submits their application, they will typically hear within 4 or 5 weeks. They keep rolling through the applications. And so it can be nice for students to have maybe 1 or 2 rolling decisions, and then a couple of the others, so that they start hearing back. It's nice to have, by the Christmas holidays, to maybe have 1 or 2 acceptances. They don't have to make their mind up, unless of course it's early decision. But it can take some of the pressure off of students just to know that they got into some colleges. I always get this question, Mary Pat, do senior year grades count? Yes, they do. They will catch up. This year's been kind of difficult. Again, with remote learning last year, a lot of seniors have had some difficulty with classes, particularly math classes is what I've seen. And, students have not done very well, or they've had to drop classes, and you have to communicate all that with colleges. Colleges do not like surprises when they get that final transcript. So grades do count. If you were mostly an A and B student all the way through junior year and you start getting C's and D's, There are colleges, UW, UCs, that they'll say, you know what, we don't want you anymore. So please, please, please keep your grades up. And as I said, May 1st is college decision day. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the college list and why it is important. So there are 3 different types of colleges in the United States. And the type of college dramatically impacts the admissibility of a student and also dramatically the cost of the college. And we're going to spend more time on cost too, but just to give everybody a basic understanding of this. So the first one is the in-state public. We have 6 in the state of Washington: University of Washington, Washington State, Western Washington, Eastern Washington, Central Washington, and Evergreen State College. So because we're residents in the state of Washington, we get priority admission to our state schools. So using UW as an example, last year, 74% of admitted students to the University of Washington, Seattle were Washington State residents. The second thing is, because we're residents and we pay property taxes in Washington, they deeply discount the tuition, because property taxes are used to fund education. So they deeply discount the tuition at our 6 schools. The University of Washington and Washington State are pretty equal. They're a little over $12,000 a year this year, which isn't cheap. And that's not room and board. That is just simply tuition. The other ones are a little bit less than that. But compared to the other 2, they're most likely going to be the lowest cost. And that's why so many families want in-state tuition. And it's because of the cost. It's hard. It's really hard to beat it. So the second one is the tricky one. It's the out-of-state public. And I have to speak very generally here because I'm talking about 49 other states. But a couple things. So first of all, we're not residents in these 49 other states. So you've lost the priority admission. We're not residents in these 49 states, so we've lost the tuition discount. So out-of-state tuition for an out-of-state public is typically 3 times in-state tuition. And colleges, again, that's one reason why colleges maybe accept a lot of out-of-state students, is because it's the money. They make so much money on them. So I always tell students, you have to pay attention to the percentage of out-of-state students that a school admits. Now, there are certain states near us: Oregon, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Utah. Not a lot of people in those states. So it's fairly easy for out-of-state students to be admitted to the public schools there. And if a student happens to be academically strong, there's a very good chance they're going to get scholarship money thrown, because the school's like, oh, please come, please come. Now there's other states, California, Texas, Georgia, things like that. They have a lot of people in those states, and they tend to be pretty protective of their schools, because the parents get mad when their children can't go to the state schools. So UT Austin is a perfect example. We got a lot of really strong students around here, but I still tell them all, it's very much a reach school. And it's because, while yes, UT Austin accepts 31% of the students, it only accepts 5% of the students from outside of the state of Texas. Even if you live in the state of California, UCLA is a very, very difficult school to be admitted to. They just announced that UCLA got the most college applications, once again, out of all the colleges in America. And it was something pretty close to 150,000 applications for about 6,000 freshman spots. So you got to keep that in mind. And then keeping in mind that some out-of-state colleges will give scholarship money to non-residents, and others say, no, we are keeping it all for our residents. California is one of those states. Texas is one of those states. So you got to pay attention to that. And then the final category of schools is the private school. And sometimes people say, oh, they're too expensive. Well, they're no more expensive than the out-of-state public. However, again, depending on the school, there are some that are quite generous with scholarship money. And so I always tell families, keep an open mind and check it out and see if there's money to be had there. There's also a category of schools called WUI schools, and it stands for the Western Undergraduate Exchange. There's 14 states Washington is one of them. I mentioned just a couple minutes ago that out-of-state tuition is typically 3 times in-state tuition. For WUI schools, it's 1.5 times. Unfortunately, it is not all the public schools. You wouldn't see, well, UW doesn't participate, Washington State doesn't participate, Oregon State or University of Oregon, UCLA, Cal Poly, San Diego State, none of those do. But there are some schools that do, like Oregon State, Montana State, Colorado State. There's a whole list. If you type in WUI, W-U-E, a list of WUI schools, keeping in mind, again, it depends on GPA. It depends, in the past they used to ask for test scores. They haven't been, but that could change again. I don't know. Not all majors are necessarily covered, but that's a good way to get out of state at a reasonable cost. So now we're going to talk about how do you create a college list. So first of all, before you start, you need to know your data points or your students' data points. And these are what I consider data points. Your high school cumulative GPA. Know if you've taken rigor classes or not, or if your student has. And again, there's not a weighted, we don't weight the GPA, but I can tell you that there are, a student with a, 2 students with a 4.0, but one student has taken classes of rigor and one student has never taken an AP class ever. And depending on the school that they're applying to, there's a good chance that the student without rigor may not get accepted to certain schools. Standardized test scores, again, if you have them, you may not need them. I always say that no one is defined by a number, but the data is important, and it can't be, sometimes I'll have families who's, a student has a 3.3 GPA, which is a good GPA, it's a B+. But then when they look at their college list that they're applying to, it's like, it's not a match because it doesn't fit into the data of that college. And reminding once again that even if you are blessed with that 4.0 and you've taken classes of rigor and you can take standardized test scores, it doesn't guarantee anything. Please know that. Okay, so obviously the internet is a great resource. I don't know what we did without it. And these are just some lists of possible sites that you can use to create a college list. In the past, the College Board was always my favorite, but over the last, 9 months or so, they have changed their website dramatically. I still use it, but it's not my favorite. And I'm hoping the next time I do this, I can tell you what my favorite one is. I kind of have to piecemeal things together, but this is a variety of different sites, or you might find a better one. Just type in college search engines. But there's certain filters that a college on a site that they're going to ask about. I'll talk about acceptance rate first. So that's usually one of the, let's say, well, what acceptance rate range do you want? And I realize everybody wants the 0 to 10% or 0 to 25%. And that's fine. Again, if you're super strong, but please, for your sake, and you'll understand why in a few minutes, expand it. Colleges that accept 50% of the students are phenomenal. Colleges that accept 75% of the students are phenomenal. And I'll prove it to you. You can decide, again, public or private. I know, at least when you're starting the search, I would include private, just to see what comes up. Again, cost. Now, if your budget is, if you're like, okay, our budget is for in-state public, well, then for Washington, your colleges will be more limited, and that's okay. They're all great schools. There's different sizes for colleges. Small is 2,000 students or less. Medium is very broad, 2,000 to 15,000 students. And anything over 15,000 is considered large. Geographic location. I always ask students, where do you want to live for the 4 years of college? And if anybody ever says anywhere, it makes me cry because it's too broad. Do you want to stay in the Pacific Northwest? Do you want to stay in the West Coast? Are you interested in the Northeast or Midwest or the South? Think about it. Where do you want to be? Pay attention to where the airport is, mom and dad, because remember, your child will be doing this by themselves. I've always liked it when my kids were pretty close to an airport, so I didn't have to worry about it. Colleges are in different settings. There's urban settings, more of a big city like UW in downtown Seattle. You can have more of a suburban setting, a rural setting. You can have a college town. Sometimes colleges will ask, do you want a commuter or a residential college? And again, this is something that College Board used to ask, and then they've changed it. But if you are asked, most students want a residential college because they want to live at college. And if you go to a commuter college, well, there's nothing wrong with the commuter college. What that means is that the majority of the students leave when classes are over. And so weekends can seem very different than when all the students are living there on campus. College majors, again, we'll talk more about majors. You certainly can be undeclared. There's nothing wrong with that. But if a student thinks, oh, maybe I want to be a nurse, maybe I want to study business, maybe I want to study forensics, maybe I want to study computer science or engineering or whatever, make sure that the school offers it. It's not the end of the world to transfer, but it can be disruptive. So if you have any idea, you're going to want to make sure, if there is any specific activities or sports or if Greek life, if students are interested in that, support programs, maybe a student has a physical disability or a learning difference, you want to make sure that they can accommodate a student. Pay attention to the political nature of a college. Some campuses can be more liberal, some can be more conservative. And again, it's all about fit. There's no right or wrong with either of that. Weather. A lot of times students visit colleges in the spring or summer, but they forget about winter. And especially my kids who say they want to go to school like in Boston, and I'll be like, or anywhere, New York, whatever. And I'll say, do you like winter? And they're like, what do you mean? And I said, well, because winter lasts from like November to April in some of these places. And I'm like, oh, so think about it. What kind of weather do you like? I often get, oh, I don't like extreme heat. But again, I always remind students, okay, if you're thinking about Arizona or Southern California, keep in mind, you're not there during the summertime. Buildings are air conditioned. And I don't know about you, but when I think about, Phoenix in January when it's 75 degrees and it's so bitterly cold here, I think it sounds pretty good. But again, it depends on the student. And again, how difficult or expensive is it to get to and from? Most of the students I work with, they want to stay fairly close to home, maybe a 2-hour plane ride, and that student who wants to go all the way across the country, maybe it means they won't come home at Thanksgiving. And how do they feel about that if they weren't able to go home? And the reason I say that is usually Christmas break is 2 weeks later, and those plane tickets can be very expensive. I often get the question about liberal arts colleges versus universities. So sometimes parents will say, my child is going to be a computer scientist, and they are not going to go to some liberal arts college, or they're going to be an engineer or whatever. And I just want everybody to understand, engineers can attend liberal arts colleges, English majors can attend universities. It has to do more with the size of the university. So in a liberal arts college, they do believe in educating the whole person. Obviously, there's a major, but they like to make sure students are educated in a variety of subjects. The liberal arts colleges are smaller. Classrooms are smaller. The overall campus size is smaller, might be 5,000 students versus 30,000 students. The emphasis is on undergraduate education, which means that there's typically not a graduate school. There might be a law school, or some one graduate program, but it's not like UW that has all these graduate programs. And again, that's not necessarily a disadvantage, because students who want to do research at the undergrad level, it can be much easier at a liberal arts college than it can be at a big university when they're competing with graduate students for research opportunities. There's a lot more discussion in the classroom. They don't usually have teaching assistants. You're usually taught by professors. Again, smaller class size. There's usually less competition for leadership positions. They get more attention, interaction with the faculty. Now, on the university side, obviously, they're much bigger, large enrollment, graduate and PhD programs, large lectures. There's usually teaching assistants, big class size, big name recognition, which again, some people find that really important. There might be a bigger focus on athletics, but again, some of the liberal arts colleges have good sports teams too. So I just always remind everybody, don't focus only on the acceptance rate. I consider that an input. I think a college is defined more by the output, which we'll talk about again more. So, okay, so if you've done the search, what do you do with this list of colleges? I suggest creating a spreadsheet to start organizing this stuff. The name of the college, location, the type, is it in-state, out-of-state, private, the size, the cost, application requirements, and you'll find all of that on a school's website. I always tell everybody, please keep an open mind, because both of my children, for their undergraduate, and they went to different undergraduate schools, but they both ended up attending schools that at the beginning of their process, they said, hey, mom and dad, just FYI, I'm not going there. And it wasn't because they're dad. And I said, yes, you will. We did make them visit it because we wanted them to see it. And then when they were there, they discovered it was totally different than what they imagined in their head. And you can look online and read things and think, but until you visit in person and you taste it, lick it, and sniff it, you don't know, because they all have different personalities and all that. There is a resource that I'll talk about a little bit more. It'll be part of what I send out afterwards, but there's a great source called the FIS Guide. It comes out every year. It's available online too. I'm a hard physical book person, so I get a new version every single year. It comes out every July, and it costs about, I don't know, $20, $15, I don't know, on Amazon. It's the top 300 schools in the United States as ranked by Mr. Fisk. And what I like about it is that the reports aren't written by college administrators. They're not marketing pieces. It's information gathered by students. And so first I talk about the academic atmosphere of a school. What's the core freshman requirements? What are the strong majors? What are the professors like? They'll talk about the social part of the college, dorms and Greek life, and is it a party school, and the cafeterias. They'll talk about cultural diversity and scholarships and sports scene and surrounding area, what kids do on the weekend, all that kind of stuff. And I always tell students, if you read that and you think, this sounds good, I like what I'm reading and stuff, and again, you got to look at the other stuff, the cost and all that, keep it on your list. But if you're reading, man, these people sound weird, or they're not my people, then you take it off your list. It's a great resource. Maybe, maybe get one and share it between families. They probably have it at the library or in the high school, college career center. I'm sure they have the FIS Guide there. It's a very popular source. There's a lot of great resources. These are two of the ones that I tend to use a lot. Again, it doesn't mean these are the only ones to use. College Board, although as I said, they have disappointed me lately, but they still have good information. And then College Data. So this is College Board, just I snipped some of the different information. So over here, you'll see the extracurricular, because, again, I have two kids. My daughter was proud of the fact that she never went to one sporting event in college. That was not her thing at all. Whereas my son was the rabid fan in the stands. That's all he cared about. So some kids care about this, and they'll show you, what level is it? Division I, is it club? Is it intramural? That type of stuff. This is a breakdown of the admitted student GPA that we talked about. Again, just to see, again, if I'm applying to a school and I've got that 3.75 or higher, I should feel pretty good. If I have that 3.0, I'm like, it's pretty unlikely, because very few students are admitted with that GPA. There's other ways to get to the U and stuff like that. A lot of students very much care about cultural diversity on campus. This shows the breakdown. This is UW, by the way, I forgot to say that. And then this is the percentage of out-of-state students that a school accepts. Now, if it was a low number, let's say it was something like, 3%, and the overall acceptance rate of a school was something like, 90%, you shouldn't, and it's a school you want to go to, don't be afraid to apply. It just means, it's not that selective of a school, whereas a school like, UW, where it's, 50% of the students are accepted. Just looking at data. And here's college data. Again, some good information. So this shows a breakdown of ACT scores. Again, depending on the school, they may or may not, it may not even be an issue, so don't worry about it. One of the things I meant to mention when we talked about transcript is, while there is graduation requirements to graduate from the state of Washington from high school, colleges can have different recommendations. This is, again, UW. You can see it here with foreign language. So 2 years is required to graduate, but you know what? UW would like to see 3. And Other schools might want to see more. And again, it doesn't mean you have to take 3 or 4, but just keep that in mind that, if that's a school you really want to go to, you might want to take that into consideration. Same thing with, again, sciences, 2 is required, but they recommend, but certainly I've certainly have had students get admitted to UW. I've seen students get admitted with 3 years of science. Again, it depends on, if you're going to be a science major, you probably should take the 4 years. And then this is the part where it talks about the selection of students that I mentioned. And this is where you can see the very important is rigor, GPA, and the essay. All right. I mentioned demonstrated interest earlier. Level of applicants' interest, not considered. So again, some schools, that might be very important or important. Other schools, it might, it's going to depend, but all this information is out there and it can really help you in figuring things out. So no one has ever said to me, Mary Pat, help me find a bad college. And I don't want anyone to go to a bad college either. So these are some of the things that I look at to determine if a school is good or bad. And I don't even like those terms, but we've talked about, I talked a little bit about the cost of college. So I don't know about you, but I told my kids, I really wanted them out in 4 years from undergraduate, if at all possible, because of how expensive college is. And so I tend to believe birds of a feather flock together. And if most kids graduate within 4 years, I always felt that my kids would get out within 4 years. So I look at the 4-year graduation rate. My rule of thumb, but I'm going to bend it in a minute, is I like to see at least 50%. I always felt if 50% of students could graduate within 4 years, that was pretty good. Like my children would have a good chance. That number may sound low to you, but just to let you know, in the United States, 56% of college freshmen graduate within 6 years. So if they're coming out in 4, that's good. Now, sometimes a college can have less than 50%. And never hesitate to ask admissions, your number's kind of low. Can you explain that to me? Because sometimes there's very good reasons. There are a number of colleges, particularly in the STEM fields, where students are required to do a co-op, which is basically they're working in their field, they're being paid, and they're usually being paid quite well. And it's usually for an average, usually 2 semesters. You're not paying tuition, but the student cannot graduate within that 4-year period because of the co-op requirements. So like if you look at a school like Northeastern in Boston, they have like almost a 0 4-year graduation rate because nobody graduates because everybody has to do a co-op. Other schools that require co-ops are Georgia Tech, Purdue, University of Cincinnati, Rochester Institute of Technology, Oregon State. I think Cal Poly has a number of them. And then other times the graduation rate can be low because it might be an overcrowded school where maybe students have a hard time getting their graduation, their required classes for graduation. So, maybe if it's only offered once a year and they weren't able to get into it, it might delay them a quarter or a semester or 2. So again, just ask these questions. And again, you might decide it's worth it. That's okay. But you want to make sure you know the information. The retention rate, that's the percentage of freshmen who come back for their sophomore year. My rule of thumb, again, 80%. I'd like to see it higher, but if it's at least 80, I feel like okay. But if it's less than 80, again, ask the commissions, why aren't students coming back? Because again, if it's too low, I would be very nervous about going there because again, it's not the end of the world to change schools, but it certainly is disruptive and can be costly. Do they have the specific programs? If your student knows they want to study computer science or marketing or whatever it is, psychology, make sure that the school offers it. Okay, does the cost work within your family budget? A lot of times families don't think about cost till this time senior year. That's a really late time because everybody's already invested. You want to think about it earlier. And does the culture of the school fit with what the student's looking for? Are these going to be their people? Are they going to be comfortable? Because colleges are like people and they have different personalities, and you want to make sure that it is a good fit. So let's talk a little bit more about graduation rates. As I said, please don't get hung up on acceptance rate. Everybody focuses on that. Colleges are businesses. They work as hard as they can to get their acceptance rates as low as possible. But if you look at this, and this isn't in any order, it's kind of random, but so you can see NYU's 4-year graduation rate is 76%. Their acceptance rate is 21%. This OOS stands for out-of-state students. So like here, the University of Michigan, which has a very, excellent graduation rate of 80% of students graduate. It has a 26% acceptance rate, and 45% of the students who are accepted come from outside of the state of Michigan. This happens, and I'm from Detroit, so I actually know the school very well. It's because they want the money. University of Michigan is a fabulous school, but if an out-of-state student thinks they're going to get scholarship money, nope. They are only letting 45% in because they want that money. But look here, Santa Clara, 87% 4-year graduation rate with a 50% acceptance rate. And they have an excellent, lots of excellent programs, but they have an excellent computer science program, an excellent business school, and they're right down the street from Stanford. And so when the recruiters leave Stanford, they go over to Santa Clara. And, again, there's a much better chance of being accepted there than here. Look at Stanford. Again, nothing wrong with a 73% graduation rate, but there's only a 5% acceptance rate. So the odds are pretty slim. So anyways, focus on graduation rates. So you've got all these different colleges. And so, you got to whittle it down, but ultimately I go through, and what I do is I let a student know, is this a match, a maybe, or a reach? All right. So this is, again, hypothetically, but we have a student with a 3.8 GPA. And this school for in-state students accepts about 62% of applicants. You can see that, and this is from a year or two ago, but you can see 70% of admitted students have a 3.75 or higher. So I would tell a student, assuming that the other parts of their application were good, they've taken classes of rigor, they've wrote strong essays and all that kind of stuff, I would say they're likely to be admitted, unless, of course, this is UW, unless, of course, they're applying to computer science or engineering, which are direct admit and are much more competitive. But let's just say they're like, I'm undeclared, or I'm a different major, not those two. Now, same student, they're applying to a different school. Now, this is where you can tell that this particular college uses a weighted GPA, because you look at the average GPA, it's a 4.09, and 95% of students have a 3.75 or higher. So this is obviously a weighted GPA. The school accepts 21% of the applicants. It's an out-of-state public that accepts 47% of the students from outside of the state. So again, you got to look at that 21%, and then half of that comes from outside of the state. I would tell the student it's a reach. Again, they might be very qualified and they might get in. I don't have crystal balls, but I don't want the student walking around going, I'm getting into, this is Georgia Tech. All right. So again, doesn't mean that they won't get in, but they should know that it's not going to be an easy get in because of the data. So when you finalize a college list, there's no magic number at all. Like people always say, oh, how many schools? It depends on what the student wants to do, and is it balanced and things like that. Never hesitate to reach out to the departments of a college. Like let's say, like this happened in our family. Our daughter wanted to study biology. You know how many colleges offer biology? About 99% of them. It's a very broad major, like English and history and things like that, but they're not created equal. And so one of the things that we did, as she was narrowing down her list, we would meet with the biology department and find out more and what they had to offer, because again, they're not created equally. Look at the FIS guide if it's available. Again, there are great schools not in the FIS guide, but there's a lot of great schools that are in the FIS guide. So use that. Look at the data, talk to students. I always tell students, like, you can follow, like say you're interested in ultimate Frisbee or something like that. You can follow them on Instagram and message students, or if you're on the campus touring, don't be afraid to talk to students. They all remember what it was like to be a high school student and looking at colleges. One of the questions I always like to ask, which drove my own kids crazy, that I would talk to the tour guides, but I'd say, well, where else did you apply? Are you glad you went here? Why did you pick this school? And listen to what they have to say. Does it work within the budget? Again, do they have the programs that are offered? And again, please, again, you don't have to visit every college, but I would never commit to going to a college unless I actually saw it in person first, because it's a really big decision. And keeping in mind that there is no perfect college. So just to talk real briefly about highly selective schools, and here's a sampling. So the term highly selective means too many qualified students are applying for too few spots. It has nothing to do with a student being qualified. In most cases, the student is more than qualified. There just aren't enough spots. And for the highly selective schools, the admissions process is very unfair and it's not transparent. So again, colleges work really hard to get their acceptance rates as low as humanly possible, because they know everybody focuses on that and thinks that must be a great school. They're great schools. I'm not saying they're not great schools, but it doesn't make them better than other schools. It's not where does a student go, it's what do they do while they're at a college. And so just to give you an idea of how acceptance rates have changed, University of Chicago, which I think has about a 6% acceptance rate now, 17, 18 years ago, it was 44%. Northeastern, which is now down to about 15%, 30 years ago, would have been like 95% of the students who applied were accepted. Rankings, like US News and World Report, none of those are valid. It's a popularity contest. Do a search on why college rankings are a bunch of hooey and see what comes up. There's some good information. I talked about yield management already. They do pay attention to that. Then there's what's called hooks in the highly selective schools. So last year, Stanford had about 45,000 students apply, and about 43,000 of them were rejected. And 70% of the rejected students had 4.0s, had taken every class of rigor or close to it that their school offered, and also had perfect ACT or SAT scores. It's not enough. That's the problem. And so of the 2,000 students who were admitted, even before the admission season opened, a lot of them were already spoken for, which is that unfair and non-transparent part that I talked about, because the first ones who got the spots were recruited athletes. Athletics makes a lot of money for colleges. Again, colleges are businesses. We're about to go into the NCAA tournament, and there's a lot of money to be made there. So basketball, football makes colleges a lot of money. So athletes, and they're a lot of times they know, like in 9th and 10th grade, where they're going to college. The next one can be legacies. Again, not all highly selective schools care about legacies, but a number do. And what a legacy means is that the parents went there. And sometimes students can have a higher acceptance rate or a better chance of being admitted because of the parents attending there. And the final piece, which is very legal, is called endowments. And this means that a family is able to write a check maybe for $5 million, $10 million. And suddenly that student is very attractive to that college, and like, wow, Mary Pat looks great. We think she would be a fabulous fit. And again, my kids went to public school. I'm assuming most of you here, you go to public school. That's just not the world I live in. I don't know about you, but I could never write an endowment check. And I don't think a lot of times people understand the wealth for these Ivy Leagues. A lot of these students who are admitted might attend highly selective boarding schools that feed into these. Again, doesn't mean that kids don't get in. They do, but not a lot of them. And it's not that the kids aren't qualified. Merit aid, which we haven't talked about yet, but we're going to in a minute. These schools don't give merit aid. Merit aid, by definition, is a tuition discount to attract a student to attend. These schools do not need to do anything to attract a student. It's like, you don't want your spot, there's somebody behind you who's willing to take it. And then a really big issue, unfortunately, is where we live. The Seattle market is full of very strong high school students, good grades, test scores, lots of activities and things like that. And when they're all applying to the same places, the same highly selective schools, colleges can't take everybody. They can't. They have to, diversify and all this stuff. And so one of the biggest problems is just that there's so many smart kids, smart parents who work at technology companies who have these smart kids, and it's just, again, how do you differentiate yourself when everybody has similar data points? And things have changed a lot. I know this is kind of small print, but I like data. And this just shows for some of the Ivy League schools, highly selective schools, their acceptance rate in 1992, which is 30 years ago, and then in 2012, and then last year, and then the number of applications that they received. I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing when you look at it, like, 30 years ago, I don't know, maybe I could have gotten into Brown or something like that with my academics. But so sometimes parents will be like, well, I got in, why can't my kid get in? And it's like, you're not comparing apples and apples. It is just a very, very different world. And again, I just always want students, if you're listening to this and you feel like I'm crushing your dreams, I'm not trying to crush your dreams. I want you to have a balanced college list. And I hope that you're able to get into these schools if that's your dream and all that. But at the same point, I want you to understand it's not you. You are most likely very qualified. And I know it's hard for people to understand, what's a 5% acceptance rate? So I focus on the rejected students. So, and these are based on last year. So if 46,000 students applied to Brown last year, well, 44,000 were rejected. Duke, 49,000 applied, 46,000 were rejected. MIT, 33,000 applied, 31,000 were rejected. And the admissions people will say, 85% probably are more than qualified. They just don't have enough spots. So if you're thinking, oh, Mary Pat, I don't care what you say, then again, that doesn't bother me at all. But what you have to ask yourself, if you're going to be one of those students, what is it about you that's going to earn you one of those spots? And it can't be your cumulative GPA, and it can't be rigor, and it can't be your test scores. Hopefully you have all that, because everybody who's applying has those same data points. So it has to be something above and beyond, and something that is uniquely yours, which is why your activities are so important. So college lists can look very different. The way that I do this color coding, a match, a maybe, a reach, I factor in a student's GPA, test scores, if that's a thing. I haven't really used test scores for the last 2 years because of all the test optional, and then factoring in the school's acceptance rate. Remember, if it's an out-of-state public, you got to factor in the percentage of out-of-state students that the school accepts. Some kids might have a pyramid, some kids have a very balanced rectangle, some have a hexagon, and some students, again, depending on what they're looking for. And one of the questions I like to ask students when I'm creating a college list is, how much rejection can you handle? I always, say, pretend you're applying to 10 colleges. How many no's do you get before your tummy hurts and you feel horrible about yourself? I mean, my number would be 3, but I do have some kids who tell me 9 that they can take it. But again, that's an answer that only a student can handle. And all these applications, they're a ton of work. Don't be thinking that these are easy peasy applications. What I don't want is for a student to have this, because again, there's no guarantee that you're going to be admitted. And we'll talk a little bit more about majors, but what I've seen this past year, as March, I don't like March as a month because the final college decisions are coming out, and this is when a lot of the highly selective schools are announcing. And where I saw a lot of issues was particularly in students who were applying for computer science programs. Like in the past, where students that I would have been like, oh my gosh, yes, you will be admitted. This year, it became a lot more competitive. And so you want to make sure you have that balanced list. So the good news is that only 3% of colleges in the US are highly selective, which means they accept 25% or less of the applicants. 80% of colleges in the United States accept at least half the students who apply. And that includes like UW and things like that. There's great schools. Remember, I showed you those graduation rates and things. Just keep an open mind. Don't just focus on those highly selective schools, because you're likely going to set yourself up for disappointment. And I talked about match, maybe, in reach schools. I want to emphasize, a match school is not a safety school. Who the heck wants to go to a safety school? I don't want anybody going to a safety school. I define a safety school as a school that everybody gets admitted to and nobody ever graduates from. That is a safety school. But just because it's a match, again, I showed you those numbers. You can have 60% acceptance rate and have fabulous graduation rates, and kids get out and they have good programs and all that. So how do you pay for college? So as I already mentioned, college is very expensive. And these are just some examples of annual college costs. So you can see UW is an in-state public. You can see the tuition here, $12,000, room and board, $26,000. Western, you can see the tuition is a lot less expensive. Room and board slightly less. So I have some asterisks by some of these schools. So Western will give merit aid to college to students. Gonzaga is very generous with scholarship money. Here's UCLA, 43,000 plus out of room and board, close to 60,000. So Colorado State, it is an out-of-state public, but it's also a WUI school. This is showing the WUI pricing. So you can see, it's not that different from UW, Stanford, and all that. And then again, not to, community college, technical colleges can be a great way to start. $4,000, and not a bad way to start the college. So as I said, colleges are businesses and they do need students. Unfortunately, in the United States, parents are expected to pay for college. It's just the way that it's set up. In other countries, it can be subsidized by the government. The US doesn't do that. So students, if you're hearing this, I am not telling you that your parents have to pay for your college. Don't say, hey, that lady said you have to pay for my college. I am not saying that. It's just in the US, parents are expected to pay. There's no subsidy from the government. There's different types of money that you can receive for college. And I'm always want to be upfront. I am not a financial planning college counselor. Find Your Fit has done financial planning sessions where I bring in outside speakers. Again, these are available on demand. We typically do one every year. But anyways, there's different types of money. This is the type that doesn't have to be paid back. So we like this kind of money. There's grants, scholarships, merit scholarships, and work study. And then there's loans. And a lot of times, like my families will be receiving financial aid packages and stuff. And a lot of times colleges will say, oh yeah, we'll cover everything, but through student loans, and student loans do have to be paid back. There's a form called the Fafsa. It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's an online form. You would fill it out in this, it comes out October 1st of senior year in high school. And then as a student stays in college, you do want to fill it out every year. There's a lot of resources available on how to fill it out, and a lot of college money, and sometimes including merit aid, which again, we'll talk about, do require this form to be completed in order to receive it. And it's free. Every college is required on their website to have what's called a net price calculator. And this just allows you can put in information, student information about grades and things like that, family income, blah, blah, blah. And it'll, again, I wouldn't make this like, oh, this is 100% accurate, but it should give you a good chance or a good understanding to see if a student would qualify for either need-based aid or merit aid. So what is, I keep talking about merit aid. Okay, merit aid, merit scholarships. So its definition is a tuition discount to attract a student to attend a college, because that's how colleges attract the smartest students. They're like, it's through money, because college is expensive. It's usually based on a student's grades, and that's why your grades do matter. So sometimes, I'll meet with a student who has a 3.0, and the parents are like, well, what about merit aid? It's like, it's probably, again, depends on the college, but it's probably not as likely to happen. But it could, and in the past, test scores were used, not currently being used, but it doesn't mean it can't help you at all. You don't apply for merit aid. When a student applies to the college, if they're admitted, they can also hear back something that says, oh, congratulations, you have been admitted, and we are going to offer you $10,000 for each of the next 4 years, $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000. Again, it depends on the school. And again, the academics of a student. So that's a good motivation to do well in your classes. You don't repay them, and you do want to make sure that they're for the 4 years of college. Sometimes they might be only for the first year, but you just want to read through all that. So how do you know if a college offers merit aid? The first way is I would go to a school's website and I would type in merit aid and see what comes up. Keeping in mind, if it's a out-of-state public and you're looking at it, you want to type in the words non-resident merit aid, because some of those out-of-state publics can be very, very generous. Like University of Arizona, Arizona State, Oregon State, again, can be very generous. Others of them, it's like crickets. Like, wait a minute, I hit return, nothing came up, and it's because they don't give it. If you public schools, the state schools tend to be pretty black and white, like they list it. This is what a student needs, grades, blah, blah. The private schools are a little more loosey-goosey. It's not always spelled out. Never hesitate to reach out to admissions. Parents, you can do this. Students, you can do it, and just say, hey, here's my data points. These are my grades. I might have test scores, whatever. I take a lot of rigor classes or whatever. Can you give me a sense? Would I, do you offer merit aid? Would I qualify for anything? And they're happy. Again, don't be embarrassed to talk about the cost of college. College is very expensive. So those are the two ways that I would recommend to determine if a college offers merit aid. Don't put off having the conversation. I know a lot of parents don't like to talk finances with their children. They like to say, oh, we'll help, we'll do anything. And also know that every family handles the cost of college differently. There are some families who say, well, we want to help you, but this is the dollar amount we can afford. Other parents might say, you got to put some skin in the game, and you should, and then other families say, we'll take care of anything. Again, it depends. Every family does it differently. There's no, one size fits all, but just appreciate anything. If your parents can help your kids, make sure you thank them, because it's very expensive. So I'm often asked about college majors. Do you have to know your majors? And so one thing about teenagers, and I love teenagers, I work with them all the time. And this is not personal to anybody, but teenagers, the frontal lobe of the brain is not formed yet. So even if students think they know, they might not know. They might change their mind. I just saw something recently, a study that was done of all the majors who changed their mind. It's usually STEM majors, because they might be harder than they think or whatever. So regarding majors, some colleges admit by specific major. Other colleges say, oh, I'll use computer science as an example. So at one college, I can say, hey, I want to be a computer science major, fill it out on the form. And a college might say, oh, congratulations, you're in our computer science program. Excellent. Another college might say, okay, we've put you into pre-computer science. You will have to complete these prerequisites. If you do so and get the proper grades, when you're done, it's a simple check the box and you're in computer science. And then there are some, University of Washington is certainly one of them, where it's a very competitive process. They don't have enough space. They don't accept everybody. So sometimes students think they want to be something. I want to be a nurse. I want to be a doctor. I want to do computer science. I want to do engineering. But sometimes it's just because they hear, or I want to be a lawyer, whatever, but they don't know anything about it. And so I'm a big believer in exploring activities, doing careers, doing some shadowing, talking to people in careers, just, you can't just take AP computer science and know that you want to do computer science. So there's nothing wrong with being undeclared in college, because again, I work with a lot of kids, they just don't know, and this pandemic has really messed them up, and they're really confused. That's okay. If you are going to be undeclared at a college, the question I would ask a college is, how will you help me figure out, and will I be able to graduate within 4 years? Going back to that graduation rate. At many colleges, again, you can change your mind, and it's not a big deal. My son went into college being an engineer because we thought that might be a good field for him. 2 weeks later, he knew it wasn't that he couldn't do the work, it just wasn't the right fit for him, because he'd never really explored engineering. And then he ultimately ended up becoming a physical therapist. So, things happen. But like at schools like UW, it says on their website, if you want to be a computer science major and you don't get in as a freshman, you're never going to be able to study computer science. And that's a problem. And so that's why you got to make sure, like, again, there's no guarantee to get into UW's computer science program. It is very competitive. I'm going to talk about it in a minute because they just released recently, and it's been a horrible, for a lot of students, it's been a really horrible time. So just know, the only school where you have to know your major, at least here on the West Coast, where you have to know your major and you cannot change your mind, is Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. They admit by major and you can't change your mind. So like I was talking to a student today who's kind of undecided and she thought maybe Cal Poly, and I'm like, unless you know for sure what you want to study, I would take Cal Poly off your college list. So UW, I was kind of referencing this, but UW is a great school. It's an in-state public, so you get the cost, but we have other great in-state schools. Washington State's got a great computer science and engineering. Western has some unique engineering and computer science, Eastern, Central, et cetera. So, this UW got a lot more applications this year. A number of students that I've worked with, and I've heard from other college counselors, students with 4.0s, lots of rigor, wrote very strong essays, they weren't admitted, or they weren't admitted to computer science or engineering. And so it's a great school, but it should never be anyone's only school on their list, because there is no guarantee to be admitted. Now, Washington State, which again has a very good computer science program, it's not impacted. You want to do computer science? They're like, great. If you have a 3.6 GPA or higher, you're guaranteed admission. And they give scholarship money. UW doesn't give merit scholarship, but Washington State does, and all that. So just, I love UW, and for a lot of kids, it's the right fit. But just please broaden. There's a lot of other schools that have great computer science programs. And the problem with the engineering school at UW, if a student is admitted to engineering, there's no guarantee. Like a lot of students think, oh, I want to do civil, I want to do mechanical, I want to do aeronautical. Well, everybody's just put into a pool, a general engineering pool as freshmen, and then they have to apply to the specific genres of engineering, and there's no guarantee that a student will get it. And again, if a student knows, like, this is exactly what I want, they might want to look beyond UW. And again, I'm not criticizing UW, but it's also a difficult school to get admitted to, and I've had a lot of sad students lately. And then there's what's called pre-professional programs. This could be students who want to become doctors. I mentioned my son is finishing up his physical therapy doctorate, dentist, lawyer. So there's no pre-med major, there's no pre-law major, pre-dental major. What there is it's called pre-professional programs. It's advising programs. So yes, a lot of students who decide to go to medical school may major in the sciences, because in order to take the MCAT, you have to have completed certain classes, but there's no specific major. But if you know you're going to be pre-professional, this should be part of your research too, because every college has a pre-med advisor or department, whatever. But again, it doesn't mean that they're created equally. And you want to find out, how will you be supported? You want to find out, well, where are students admitted to? And you can't find this out on a website. You have to go and you have to talk to them. And just to give students an idea, I don't know if it's because of the pandemic, but I've had a lot of high school students who say they want to become a doctor, and that's fantastic. I'm not saying that anybody should not become a doctor, but there's data. And what I tell students is, of all the college freshmen who say, I'm going to become a doctor, in the United States, 47% of those actually end up taking the MCAT. So that's a pretty big drop, all right? 53% of students who say, I'm going to become a doctor, don't. And of the 47% who take the MCAT, only 40% of those are actually accepted to medical school, because it's really tough. And the same thing with law school and dental school and all that. So if you are interested, you got to think long-term, think about the cost. Also think about your grades. Grades are really important. And I sometimes tell students, you don't want to go to that super hard school for undergrad. Your grades are really important. You want to go someplace where maybe it's a little easier for you to be a rock star, or someplace where you can get all the activities that are part of a medical school or law school application, where it's a little easier instead of having to shove everybody out, to fight for the spots. How do you explore careers? Well, what interests you? What are you curious about? I always encourage students to talk to people whose careers interest them. A lot of times teens feel like, oh, I'm a teenager, who would talk to me? Most adults, if you're polite and professional in your demeanor, they're happy to talk to teens, and parents can be a big help here. And parents, don't take this personally, but I always say, if you happen to work in the career that your child's interested in, you're probably the worst person for your student to talk to. And it's just because part of the being a teenager is you have to separate from mom and dad. So maybe, introduce them to one of your coworkers or something like that. You can job shadow, which just simply means, sitting quietly and observing and maybe writing down your questions. You can ask for internships. But again, depending on the program, like, I don't mean to keep talking about computer science, but, I always tell my students, if you think that simply taking AP Computer Science principles and Computer Science A and AP Calculus and physics is going to get you into UW Computer Science, it's not, again, because everybody has taken those classes. And so the things that a student does, their activities, can be very helpful, again, when you write about them on your college application as to why you know computer science or engineering or nursing or business or whatever it is, what you have done, that you've learned that is your path. I'm a big believer in visiting colleges. Again, you wouldn't do this typically in 9th or 10th grade, but junior year, spring break, summer, senior year, it's a great time. This will be one of the resources that you will be sent. I have a tip sheet on visiting colleges for parents and also for actual students, because it's a different process. And parents, a lot of times you just got to keep your mouth shut and then maybe ask your student what they think. Because remember, we're not the ones going, it's the students who are going. Again, you can discuss things, but remember, their opinion is more important because they're the ones who are going to be going there. But these are some reasons, because sometimes families say, oh no, we'll wait until we get all our decisions in before we will visit colleges. Well, as I said, March is a month for that. By the end of March, you'll hear from all the colleges. Although some of them are saying, oh no, we'll let you know in early April, but you have to decide by May 1st. And it's very hard, especially if the colleges are, a little further away than an hour or two in a car. It can be very hard to handle all the logistics of that. But visiting colleges can help demystify for a student what it means to go to college. Kids hear about this, go to college, but they don't know what it means. And so seeing a place in person can really boost their confidence. It can motivate a student. I've had students who go, that's the grade I need. These are the test scores, or whatever. Okay, I want to go here and I'm willing to do the work. Again, some colleges care about demonstrated interest. Nothing proves demonstrated interest like, going on an actual tour. It helps a student to figure out what's the right fit. I was talking to a friend today whose daughter's been visiting colleges, and she was saying, like, she would know, her daughter would know. She's like, nope, let's just leave this place, because there's a feeling that you get to it. And also it does create discussion points between a parent and a student. And again, try to let the student control it, but you can certainly say, oh, well, I noticed this, what did you think of that? And, it might be that the student doesn't have a problem with it. So how do you choose? Again, there's lots of different factors. Does the cost work? Does the culture work? Do they have programs that are offered? It is a big decision. You will be sent the resources list, but these are some of the books that I particularly use a lot and enjoy. These are all available at the library. They're also available, Amazon or wherever. Admission Matters is just a great overview of the admissions process and talks about the things that I talked about. The FIS guide, I guess I should update that. That's 2019, and I've got the 2022 on my desk here. Colleges that change lives. These are 40 small liberal arts colleges that are, known for just being extra special in what they offer students. And thank you for everybody who supports the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. I couldn't do this without them. And they are, they're having their annual fundraiser on April 28th. In addition to Find Your Fit, there's pantry packs and Balance in Mind and links and kids coming together. There's a lot of programs and all these grants throughout the classrooms that the foundation supports. So please support the Lake Washington Schools Foundation because it's an excellent organization. All right, so I forgot to tell you that I can't answer questions and all at the same time. So I am going to now see if there's any questions that I can answer. That says, okay, even though there's no magic number, what would you say is an appropriate range? If I had a student, so again, it's going to depend. If I had a student who says, oh my gosh, I love Washington State, I've been there, it's my favorite school, I have a 3.7 GPA, that's the only school I'm applying to, I'd be okay with that because they're guaranteed admission. Now, if that same student was saying UW, I'd be like, oh no, you need more than one because there's no guarantee. And as I said, this past year, this was really hard. So again, it depends. If a student, has the numbers, and I would say, okay, well, it looks like, again, you have to take, I don't know what students' essays look like and all that kind of stuff, but assuming everything's strong. And every school based on the data, the acceptance rate, their grades look good, they've taken rigor, all that stuff. If 2 or 3, again, if they're match schools, I'd be fine with that. Again, I've had some kids who also applied to, I don't know, maybe 22, and most of them, because this was a kid who couldn't take rejection, but they were all matches, but he just kept, I don't know, he got into applying. So every application is work. And I tell students, if they know in their heart of hearts they would never go to a school, take it off their list, unless it's an in-state public and their parent says you have to have one, which is what we did with our kids. So I'm sorry, I can't say that there's a, but I would say, I don't know, again, as long as it's balanced, probably 4 or 5, maybe. I can't really give you it. Okay. Yes, UW certainly pretty much every college offers psychology as a major for undergraduate. Psychology is one of those degrees, if you want to, become a counselor or therapist, you typically have to get your master's degree in addition. GPA for out-of-state students. Again, it depends on the college. What I tend to, again, the breakdown of admitted students includes out-of-state students if it's a out-of-state public. But like the University of California system, which uses a weighted GPA, it says on their website that the minimum GPA for in-state students is 3.0, and that's a weighted GPA. But for out-of-state students, it's a 3.4. Like they won't even consider it unless an out-of-state student has a 3.4. And again, for the more selective schools, like Michigan or UT Austin or Georgia Tech, I tell students, they're going to take, if they take you, it's because you're super, super strong. If you're just average for those type of schools, for other schools, this isn't a diss against Michigan State, but I've had kids with 3.3s get into Michigan State, and it's a FIS guide school. They give scholarship money to students. So it depends. You have to do your research. There's not a simple answer to any of this. Let's see, anything else here? What about students who want to take a gap year? Nothing wrong with a gap year at all. So gap years, again, are handled differently depending on the college. So some colleges, so if a student goes through the process for senior year and then decides, you know what, I'm not ready, I need a break for whatever reason, there's a lot of colleges that if they contacted the college and said, may I take a gap year? They'll say, absolutely. Just give us, maybe $500 for a deposit, to save your spot, and everything's fine. Other colleges, like UW or the UCs and stuff like that, they go, nope, you have to reapply. And so they won't hold your spot. So one of the things that I would figure out if a student wants to, again, work on your college list and do some research. A lot of times you can just type in on a site, gap year, see what comes up, but you can always reach out to admissions. Everyone's always afraid to talk to admissions. The admissions, that's what they're there for. Parents can call, students call, it doesn't matter. Do you allow students to take a gap year? And it's going to be a yes or no answer. And the problem if a school says no is that during the gap year, the student's going to have to go through the application process again, which will probably cause them stress. So there's no right or wrong answer. And again, sometimes the gap year causes a student to change what's important to them, and that maybe when they're done with their gap year, they no longer want to go to that college that they were accepted to. So there's different ways to handle it. And I do apologize, but it's just this is not a one size fits all process. What about reapplying in the future years if you don't get into the college? So there's two ways to handle this. One, you might be talking about transferring in, like, so like UW. Okay, let's say a student says, oh my God, UW computer science, that's really what I want. They don't get accepted to the program. Maybe they don't get accepted to UW at all. I don't know. So what happens, and again, UW's website is very clear about this. It says for both engineering and computer science that half of the cohort is filled with freshmen. The other half of the cohort is going to be filled with students who complete their associate's degree at the community colleges, and then they transfer in. And people will ask me questions like, well, what, can I go to UW Bothell and then transfer? Well, you can try, but if you look at UW's website, something like, I don't know, 67% of the students who are accepted as transfer students, they come from community colleges. And it's because of the agreements that the state colleges, four-year state colleges have with the community colleges, and they want to prioritize those. And UW will tell you, you call there, they're like, oh no, you should come through community college. You're more likely to be admitted, especially into one of those more select programs. So that would be a transfer student. Now, what if a student says, oh my gosh, I decide, I didn't get into any school that I really want. I feel like I'm settling. I don't like any of these schools. And they decide to reapply the next year. You can certainly do that. They'll know that you applied before because you're in their system. However, my advice would be to do, especially through activities, is to do different things, again, to make your application stronger or to learn more about a specific career or something like that. Again, because you don't want to submit the same application because you're likely not to be admitted again because nothing's changed. But if you've changed things, it could possibly work. We did a session last May on international colleges. Again, it's on the Lake Washington School Foundation website. It's a great session. I just moderated it because that's not my area of expertise, but the person who spoke did. So I would recommend that you go to the website and look that up. So, all right. Let's see if there's anything else here. Okay, let's start here. Does the acceptance regarding the GPA depend on the school? Yeah. Someone's asking, does the GPA matter with specific programs? Yeah, it does. Again, most students at UW, and that's what they were asking about, they're admitted, like, not that many students are admitted specifically into a major as a freshman. There's like 9 majors, and for most of them, it's a very small number, like literally like 50 or 60 kids, like that's it. And then students apply later on as their students at UW. Obviously, students applying to the computer science program or engineering, and again, UW has this on their website. I think the admitted student average GPA overall for UW is like a 3.8. Pretty much for computer science, it's closer to a 4. And when we did the seminar a couple of weeks ago about standardized testing, and I brought in an outside speaker, and he was showing for test scores, it was at University of Illinois, Urbana, what test score was appropriate for the major. And again, nothing wrong with psychology or sociology majors, but the required or the average test score for those majors was much lower than what was required for like computer science or engineering. Like those had to be like 99th percentile. So yes, and that's what I was seeing this year with my computer science majors. Kids with 4.0s, 1,500 test scores, great activities, great essays, and all this stuff, not being admitted, and then a student going into a completely different major, and that doesn't make one major good or bad, but maybe they had a 3.6, and maybe no test scores and they're getting in, it's because of the major. At least that's my opinion. Okay, let's see. AP is a advanced placement. It's part of, you got to look at the course catalog for a high school. Every school offers, but all the Lake Washington school district high schools offer most, I think all of them do. I don't know if like Emerson does or not, but the main ones all offer AP classes. And if you're coming from a different school district, maybe you're an Issaquah school district listening to this, Issaquah High School has AP classes, but Skyline has IB. Again, it's going to depend on your high school, but they're just AP or IB. They're just the rigor classes, and you can see them in the course catalog. Depending on, like if a student wants to take, AP calculus, well, they have to have had math analysis or pre-calculus first. If they want to take AP bio, they have to have taken regular biology first. So it'll all outline it in your course catalog. Can a student drop a certain subject from a transcript and retake it? Yes. So students can drop a class, and I know sometimes keeping in mind, I am not a school counselor, I'm a college counselor. But if a student drops a class, sometimes it's still going to show up on the transcript as a withdrawn or something like that. Can students retake them? Yes, they can do summer school. Sometimes there's Apex classes or BYU online classes. You always have to have permission from the school, from your school counselor to do these things. If my own son, he took geometry between 8th and 9th grade summer. We're kind of hands-off parents. He got a C the first semester and it showed up on his transcript and it messed up his GPA. So he retook that geometry class in the fall of his senior year because it was messing up his GPA for scholarship money that he wanted for a school he wanted to attend. And so both grades show up on the transcript, but the GPA is impacted by I'm assuming the higher GPA is going to be the second class. And again, remember I said that there's a spot on the college application to explain things. You can explain things like that, a simple sentence. They don't need ooey gooey details. And especially with the last 2 years with remote learning and COVID, and lots of kids have had issues, and there's no shame in doing all that. And quite frankly, I think a lot of colleges look at that and go, wow, look at that student, the fact that they redid it. And, if a student, has a couple C minuses, again, boy, use that GPA calculator that I mentioned. If you can change those to A's, it'll make a really big difference in the GPA. So yes, you can certainly. Now, does a student have to? No, I've also, I remember years ago, I had a student who got 2 C's her second semester of junior year. I'm sure senioritis had kicked in. One was in her math class and one was in chemistry. And she did summer school and she retook the math class and she got an A. But we talked about chemistry, and this student was just not a STEM student. She was never going to be a STEM student. She was more humanities oriented. And so she wrote that on her college, little box about anything else you should know. And she said, I was very disappointed that I got these C's. I retook the math. I got an A. I'm very proud of myself, but I'm not doing anything about chemistry because I am not a STEM student. And it worked for her. She got into the schools that she wanted to get into and all that. Again, will it work for everybody? Can't say that, but again, you can, no, I do not share. There'll be resources that I send out, but I do not share my slides. Just writing about, so someone's asking about the proof. I mean, I've asked college counselors, they say if students talk about something really specific and unusual, they might do a search to see if it's true. But there's no proof to activities. I certainly hope nobody's lying. That does happen, I suppose. We don't require, like Washington doesn't require community service hours or things. I mean, so I don't know how to answer your question, but there is no proof, but I would certainly hope people are telling the truth. And if you're not, don't tell me anything then. So it's so, it says, what if a student likes to do hobbies but doesn't participate in competitions? That's okay. I mentioned the student who was building a Tesla coil in his garage. Okay, he was just doing it because he wrote about that in his college essay because he loved engineering. I had another kid who he built a roller coaster in his grandparents' backyard and had a lot of fun doing it. Again, it wasn't for a competition. It's just whatever a student does. And your activities don't all have to be career oriented. There's nothing wrong with, I don't know, doing a sport or being in a culinary club or whatever. All I'm saying is activities are important. And if you're applying to a more selective major, like if you, again, it depends on the schools you're applying to. If you're going into a school where they just go, hey, as long as you've done the math and stuff like that, you're in computer science. But if you're looking at something like a UW or other programs where, like a Purdue or an Urbana or Georgia Tech, boy, oh boy, you better have the goods to back up that interest and to prove it to them. So, is there? Let's see, what else we got here? Yeah, the college application timeline is going to be one of the resources that I send. So, no, Running Start is recognized outside of Washington State. It's dual enrollment is another name for it. And other states have it with similar programs. The thing I do just, again, it depends where a student's going to be applying to school. Again, most of the colleges in the West, in our area, they love Running Start, they recognize it, it's great. But when a student does Running Start, the primary goal, the initial, the first goal is that they're meeting their graduation requirements for high school. And it is possible that if they applied to some school, I don't know, I always say like Vermont or Arkansas, but it's possible that they could say, okay, we see you graduated from high school, but we don't accept these college credits. That's always a possibility. And even if a student has an associate's degree, and if you do Running Start, a student is not applying as a transfer student. They're still applying as a freshman in college, and they have to meet all the requirements for freshmen in college. Once they get accepted to a school, they accept the college's offer, then they send their college transcript, and the college decides what they're going to accept. Again, around here, it's not going to be an issue, but it is possible that a student could have 2 years of an associate's degree done, and then the college goes, we only count you as a freshman, so you have 3 more years of college. So again, that should be part of a student's research if they want to do Running Start. Will it be accepted? Making sure that they're taking the right kind of classes that are likely to be broadly accepted and things like that. Okay, someone's telling me I'm spotty. That's weird. I have the internet. Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm glad to know it's not me because I'm not very good at technology, and I do make sure I have my Ethernet plugged in. Okay, so Ivy League colleges, it's a generalized term. I tend to use the term highly selective. It's just, these are the schools, when you think of, colleges you have heard of in the United States, you think, Harvard and Stanford and Princeton and Columbia and, whatever. There is a pool of 13 colleges that make up the Ivy League. And, the Ivy League was actually initially, I think my understanding was created to keep, the colleges very white, very privileged, and it was only for rich people and all that kind of stuff. And I'm a first gen I'm a Polish girl from Detroit, so that I'm not quite the Ivy League person, but it's a generic term. It just means the colleges that are the most selective. And oftentimes when people think of colleges in the United States, these tend to be the ones that everybody has heard of. It's just very, very exclusive, hard colleges. We always talk about gap year. So a student asked, if I create a website that gains traction and displays my ability to code, will this interest colleges? I don't have the best grades, like a 3.5 to 3.75. Okay, first of all, those are very good grades. Don't be saying that about yourself. A 3.5 it's almost like an A. Okay, 3.7 is an A minus, but those are good. All right. Now, UW computer science, it's going to be really hard, but you know what? UW Bothell has computer science. Washington State has computer science, and Washington State doesn't, their application process is much easier. There's no essays or anything like that. So, but a school, Oregon State, yes, they would love that. Gonzaga, yes. Seattle U, University of Oregon, ASU, U of A, yeah. Colorado State, Boulder, yes. You won't have, again, part of it is you got to figure out, Montana State. These are all schools that have great, strong computer science programs. Like I said, everybody always focuses on UW, but there's other schools. So I want you to know you're going to be fine. And again, don't ever do an activity to look good to a college. Do it because it interests you. Do it from here, not from here. If you do it, like the person who asked about I don't know that they were asking about making up activities. But be real, okay? Just be you, and you're going to have plenty of choices. You should be proud of that GPA. Sophomore twins, they don't have any idea what they want to study. That's normal. So I do meet with a lot of 9th and 10th graders, and I got to tell you, most of the time they're there because their parents want them engaged. Most 9th and 10th graders, I'll make a joke. I'll be like, yeah, you're probably wondering why you're, talking to me. And they start laughing because they have no interest. So just know your twins are normal. What you could just, I'd say visiting colleges is more appropriate junior year, as I said, midwinter break, spring break, over the summer. If you're going to be going someplace and you're going to be near a college, and again, at that age, I don't even know if I'd go on an official tour, because if they're not engaged, it's like a death march, quite frankly. You got to be careful with those college tours, because if you make them, so that they're really tedious, like, oh my God, the kids hate it. Siblings often get dragged onto college tours, and then their parents will say, oh, well, they toured those colleges. And when I ask them, most of them were looking at their phone the whole time and they weren't paying any attention. So I wouldn't worry about it. One of the, maybe do something over the summer where they can explore an activity that interests them. One of the great things that they offer through the school district, they haven't announced their summer schedule yet, is the WANIC classes. They stand for the Washington Network of Innovative Careers. And like Washington, Issaquah, Bellevue, North Shore, they all participate. And these are all career-oriented classes, and students get high school credit, CTE credit for it, usually half credit. And they're great. They can be on video game design or music or EMTs or healthcare or biotechnology, all sorts of different subjects. They've been remote the last couple of years, but I think they're going to be, hopefully they'll be in person this year. But that can be a, maybe say, pick a class type thing. Or and most students, after they're done, I ask them how they like them. And most kids, they really enjoy them because they're hands-on learning, and they're being taught by people who work in the field. So I wouldn't really worry too much about sophomores who weren't interested in the college process, because honestly, most are not, unless they've got a lot of junior and senior friends and then they hear about their stress. Cumin does not, usually Cumin is more like students, I don't think they get high school credit for Cumin. And I apologize, I'm not a school counselor. I've had kids tutor at Cumin and take classes at Cumin, but it doesn't go on their course catalog. Now, the University of Washington does offer summer classes that high school students are allowed to take. You have to pay for the class and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of kids really enjoy. Sometimes they're remote, sometimes they're in person, again, depending on, I can't tell you what's going on, but I've had kids take just classes that really interest them, maybe design classes, computer classes. Again, college kids can be taking it too, but they do allow high school students to take those and then get college credit. It doesn't show up, it doesn't take the place of a high school graduation requirement, but they can put it on their transcript or show it as having taken. Someone asked if being part Native American. I don't know a lot about that. you say here it's 1/16, and I know there's a percentage that a student, and I can't remember if it's 1/16 or if it's 1/8. That again, don't hesitate to reach out to colleges, because actually, if you on that college data site where it shows what colleges consider, different underserved populations can have priority. So yes, again, there's a proof process. This is not something where you can make it up. They will usually ask for some sort of documentation, but I would ask a college admissions a little bit more for that. Okay, well, I think that is all. I didn't do too bad, only 10 minutes over 8:30, so that's pretty good for me. I thank you, everybody, for coming. As I said, there's going to be a lot of resources that come out along with the recording, and thank you for your support of the Lake Washington Schools Foundation, and please continue to support them so they can do it. But hope everybody has a good night, and thanks for being an active and participating audience.